As you begin to progress in sim racing, it can be difficult to understand what you need to do to progress to an elite level, and it's quite easy to become stuck 1 to 2% off the ultimate pace. Drivers often ask us if they need to focus on setups, trail braking, or thinking about slip angle. So in this video, I'm going to review my top 5 tips for advanced sim racers to build your pace and ultimately win more races. First of all, you need to make sure that you're driving on the absolute limit. We see a lot of drivers driving on a limit. They have the front or the rear of the car sliding, but ultimately they're not maximizing the full potential of their car. This means that the car is generally understeering or oversteering. And what we actually want is to be using all of the tire's grip, all the potential grip that we can get from each individual tire at all points through the corner. So if you are understeering or if you are oversteering, that means that there is an imbalance in the car and you won't be going through the corner at the optimum speed. The other thing that we see with driving at the limit is drivers being on the limit, for example, entering a corner, however then being below the limit at the mid corner and the exit. And of course, to be on the absolute pace, we want to make sure that we are at the limit all the way through the braking, turning and acceleration phase of each corner. When you're driving on the absolute limit, when you're extracting the most grip from all 4 tires during the braking, turning and acceleration, you will see a driver only correcting the steering wheel in tiny amounts. If a driver is having any big corrections in the steering wheel, that will essentially be costing them time. If a driver is making tiny micro corrections on the steering wheel, that generally shows that the car is being fluid through the corner. That means that the car is rotating ever so slightly through the entry, mid and exit of the corner, which ultimately means that they're driving the car at the absolute limit and carrying the most amount of speed through each bend. The next thing to speak about is telemetry, and if used in the right way, it can be incredibly useful for improving your lap time. However, we do see a few drivers not using it because it can seem intimidating, but once you understand a few basics, it can be incredibly useful. There are 2 common mistakes that we see with telemetry. First of all, it's just when drivers don't use it, but you should be using it. There's access to so much high-level information here that you really can use to improve your driving. The other problem that we see is when drivers almost consume themselves with way too much data. They're going over every different channel, the braking, the acceleration, the steering, the speed in each phase of the corner, and they almost overwhelm themselves with the amount of information available. And what we're looking for with telemetry is a happy medium, the right amount of information to look at and absorb and create a priority list of things that you need to work on with regard to your technique. So first of all, make sure that you start with an apples to apples comparison. Make sure that you start with a high quality benchmark lap with the same circuit conditions and the same setup. From here, begin looking at the speed trace, the braking shape and the throttle percentage. These are the 3 main things that you can use very quickly to improve your technique. And when you're looking at an entire lap, you want to look for the patterns of differences between you and the benchmark lap. So for example, if your minimum corner speed is always lower in the slower corners, you know that you may have a problem on corner entry into hairpins and other type bends. When you look for these patterns, you can then apply that information to a more broad technique and you'll find yourself finding plenty of time on the track. The next thing to focus on are setups in sim racing, and this is really important. We see a lot of drivers buying or downloading different types of setups, and while this can be a good starting point, it's certainly not the be all and end all. The problem is drivers all have slightly different driving styles, and so a setup that might work for one driver may not work for another. You'll first need to understand how to feel an imbalance in setup before you then apply that understanding to actually changing and adapting the setup itself. So to begin this process, first take a track map and cut each corner up into 3 sections: entry, apex and exit. From there, think your way around the circuit and make a little note on each phase of the corner as to whether the car is understeering or oversteering, and this will give you a good indication of the balance. Once you've done this for every corner, you'll have a great idea of the patterns around the circuit. So you may see, for example, in all the fast corners, you've got understeer. Well, if you do this and you have understeer in those faster corners and you're driving an aero car, and the car is great in all the other corners, we can safely say that it's probably an aerodynamic understeer problem. From there, you could add a little bit of front wing, and it may be that that really fixes the problem. The key here is to get the information out of you, whether that's just from memory of your previous session or using replays and down onto some paper. Just the process of doing this will make you a more complete and faster driver. Once you understand the imbalances in the car, it's time to try and change some setup. Now, I recommend only changing one thing at a time and starting off with the very basics. So I would begin to play with setup by changing the rake in the car. The rake in a car is the difference between the front and the rear ride height. Adding more rake increases the rear ride height in comparison to the front, and adding less rake does the opposite. With this simple change, you can shift the grip forward or rearward in your car and really get an understanding of the basics of setup. Once you've done this and you've got the feeling, you can begin to try different aspects of setup, but certainly start with the basics and really make sure that you understand how that change adapts the setup and the balance of the car. The next thing that you'll want to work on if you want to become an elite sim racer is making sure that you practice in the right way. The best drivers that I've seen in sim racing and in the real world are highly adaptable. They can adapt their driving style to any car, condition or circuit. Having this adaptability means that as your tyres lose grip or as the fuel weight comes out of the car, you're able to optimize these ever-changing conditions and ultimately perform better on track. And from what I see, these drivers practice in various different conditions and different cars, enabling them to adapt themselves very quickly to changing conditions. So once you're sure that you've got the fundamentals of your driving complete, and check out our courses if you do want to hear a little bit more about that, then try changing different cars on different circuits and different conditions. And this will force you to think about how you need to change your technique for each car, circuit or condition, and that will make you a more rounded driver. Next, you'll want to think about your race strategy, and in particular, the way you treat your tyres. Go hard at the beginning, scrub those tyres, and they won't give you the optimum grip at the end of the race. Go too slow at the beginning and you'll be wasting too much time. And this feeling, this understanding of the tyres and how they degrade over a stint only really comes from experience. So try to set up your practice sessions so that you are understanding how the balance changes as the tyres wear, as the fuel weight comes out of the car, and you'll be a much more complete driver when it comes to a race distance. Now that you've learned about these advanced tips, make sure you check out the other Driver61 sim racing content designed to make you faster in the sim. You can check them out here, and I'll catch you in the next video.